It's that way, Dora. Tribe of Names, Simon here. It's a very wet day in Philadelphia, but that doesn't really bother me. I'm an Englishman after all. But today we're asking a question. It's a simple one. It's obviously got to have a simple answer as well. And that question is, where have all the good songs gone? Let's find out, shall we? It is not nice out there. Tribe of Names. My name is Simon Godfrey and I'm a professional musician who has spent the past 35 years working in and sometimes around the recording industry, writing and performing music. On this channel we provide creative tips and tricks for the musician and songwriter in you. And today we're asking the question, as I said earlier, where have all the good songs gone? Back in the good old days before COVID set a torch to the entire music industry, I sometimes got asked what I did for a living. And when I answered I was a musician or a music professional, the question was shot back directly to me, what kind of music do you play? To which my answer was nearly always, whatever pays the most. Now this might sound a bit odd, but it does actually have some direct bearing to the question which we're asking today. And that's because when you're a professional musician, you tend to have to leave your likes and dislikes at the door because you've got to get on with the music. And whatever pays the music bills, that's the music you're doing for the day. Doesn't matter if you like it or not. When you're a music fan, it's a very different proposition because you actually have definite tastes which shape who you are. And I remember as a kid, listening to my dad saying to me that the music that I listened to back in the day, and this was mostly chart music, and we're talking bands like, I'm going to show my age here, Squeeze and XTC and the Police and the Specials and the Selector and bands like that. My dad would often say, there's no tune, it's just noise and it's terrible music. And of course I would look at him like I just couldn't understand where he couldn't see that kind of, where he couldn't see the sound that was coming out of these bands and why it wasn't glorious. And so I often think to myself when I hear people of my age now saying exactly the same thing about the current state of pop music, it kind of makes me laugh a little bit because basically I guess we all turn into our parents at some point. But I do think that it's not without merit. I remember seeing a video not too long ago of Rick Beato on YouTube, and his video which was called Why Boomers Hate Current Pop Music, or Why Boomers Hate 21st Century Pop. And he levelled a couple of very interesting arguments in that, which I won't go into right now because it's his channel. If you want to see it, I'll leave a link in the comments to the specific episode in which he talks about that. But you have to understand that a lot of the music that defines who we are tends to happen after some vigorous research as young people. I didn't instantly find the music that I loved right out of the gate. I had to do a little bit of research. And the fact that people of my age generally don't particularly like current chart music speaks to the fact that the world changes. And we change with it, but all in different ways and often divergent ways as well. I don't understand a lot of the pop music that's being made today, but that's because it's not directly speaking to me any longer. I'm an old man, an older man maybe I should say. But I think it comes down to the fact that, it's a case of communicating with the generation that's making the noise at the moment. And the noise that is being made by young people. And I guess one of the other things we can ask is, what constitutes a good song in our mind? And what constitutes a bad song? Now, art being subjective, I can only really speak personally about this. But it tends to be within a sort of trinity, a triangle of parameters which really sort of like excite me. And the first one is a good harmonic structure. Something with decent chords and a decent melody. The second one is the ability to surprise me. And that's really important. If I know where things are going, I mean, that in some ways has its own attraction as well. If I can see where a song is going, and a well-crafted song will do that. It will lead you on, but maybe still surprise you as it goes along. And the third part really is a good lyric. And I do admit that even though those three elements do sound quite clearly defined, I have to recognise that my taste has not always been as impeccable as my memory seems to think it has been. And I often look back at those days and hear some of the songs which I really did love and think to myself, what on earth was I thinking? There's an evolution, there's a pathway, a sort of, what do you call it, a sort of a musical narrative which you're exploring. And the music around you. I mean, I remember some of the things that I when I first got into the really sort of esoteric stuff that was really not mainstream pop. It was mostly a lot of the art rock and the prog rock stuff and jazz fusion as well. Not that I can play much of that stuff, but it really intrigued me. It did something different, like bands like the Mahavishnu Orchestra and King Crimson and Return to Forever. All of these bands really triggered something inside me that made me realise that there was something more than just chart material, that you could push the boundaries. And really, at the end of the day, when you look at people who are into into pop music right now, you have no idea where that is going to take them. Okay, it might sound banal to you, but that might be the first step on something greater. And I mean, I always like to think, optimistically about people's taste in music. But I will say that one of the other things that I have discovered over the years is that everybody thinks they have great taste in music. I haven't met a single person that says, yeah, I've got no taste in music. You might have a few people that say, I don't really listen to music, I don't really care about it, but no one will say, yeah, I have a really terrible taste in music. It's like any kind of fashion. Everybody thinks that they are the arbiter of what's good and bad, myself included. And that's something which is worth mentioning, because so much of music, as like so much of art, is a subjective call. And so as a result, you're placing your own values on someone else's taste. And of course, that's going to clash. And I really do think that, for people like myself and people of my generation that look down upon the current generation of musicians and think, well, that's just crap. We're applying all of the things that we have had in our experiences and we've learned about music to music which we know little about. And I always like to think charitably about this, because, for 101 pop songs which don't make it into the charts or make it there for like 30 seconds and are, frankly crap, there's always a couple of classics which make it out of that sort of cloud or that group of bands to become real classics. And we don't know what those classics are until much later in the game. So I always like to give every song that I hear a chance, because you never know what's going to be that next future classic. Change is a strange thing. I mean, the world changes around us and we change along with it. And at some point we tend to diverge with what is popular and into our own, particular music taste or our own musical genres. And to give you some example of this, I remember, I think I used to love chart music, a lot of chart music, right up till about maybe sort of like the early 2000s, when I suddenly realised so much of it wasn't speaking to me any longer. And it just sounded one-dimensional to me. And I realised the reason why is because that music was no longer aimed at me. However much I wanted to like this music, the lyrics, the techniques, the sounds were no longer aimed at me, and I didn't understand them. And it takes a very open mind to continue to engage with music or engage with art that you don't initially understand. And of course, the very first thing that any music person wants to hear is music that they enjoy. And if you're not enjoying it, you tend not to want to work at it. Anyway, I realised that was the point. That was the moment where I really started to feel old and out of touch. And it's not something to be afraid of, really, at the end of the day. But it's also not something to get up on your high horse and say, well, music is no longer good. What it really means is that music no longer speaks to you. This kind of, the modern music that you're hearing now, And if you're young and seeing this video in a number of years' time and feeling how I'm feeling right now, you'll know what that change entails. It's a, you know, you move on. And also there's one other thing which is worth mentioning, is that when I was young, music was all I had. I didn't have a mortgage, I didn't have a car, I didn't have a family, you know, I didn't have any of those things to take my mind off things. That was what defined me. Music was what, you know, music and fashion was what defined who I was, because that's all I had. These days, you know, I have a house, I have a mortgage, I have a family, and as a result, you know, my priorities are very different. You know, music no longer absolutely defines who I am. So finally, there is one last point which I think is more important than maybe all of the other things which I've been speaking of today, which is music is not a finite space. There is plenty of room for all of the genres and all of the styles of music that we like and dislike. And it's really important to understand that just because you no longer like the chart music, that doesn't mean that your music is any less relevant to you and to me. I mean, I know that for me, genre no longer really exists. There is only music which delights me. And if the music that you listen to delights you, that's all that matters. So, Tribe of Names, this is Simon speaking. Until next week, we'll see you later. Goodbye.